This is Faux-Authentic History.
Hi, everybody. Welcome to the show. I'm Holly Fry.
And I'm Brian Young.
You are? Fantastic.
So I'm told.
Today we are going to talk about something that is a little bit of recent history, and it also is something that remains a bit controversial. There are some people who would actually say that this topic is a little bit more conspiracy theory than hard history, but there are enough supporting materials that I feel like it would be remiss to ignore it.
So just a heads up for anybody who's troubled by the idea of alien life on Earth, that is exactly what we're discussing. So if that might upset you, this might not be the best episode for you. We're speaking specifically about the work of self-proclaimed evil alien scientist Jumba Jookiba and the work he dedicated his life to creating sentient life.
And Jookiba's Experiment 626 is really well known already, even in circles where conspiracy theories and their histories aren't really discussed. There are sometimes a lot of crazy explanations that try to minimize the fact that that was an alien experiment. So while 626, though, does come up in today's podcast, what we're actually going to focus on here is Jookiba's other work. And even then, we are really just scratching the surface. But first, we want to give you a little background on Dr. Jumba Jookiba.
So Jumba hailed from the planet Queltaquan. Mm-hmm. Jookiba was large and had a rounded body. His skin was primarily purple with a pale mauve tone along his face and belly, and he had 4 eyes.
And Jookiba was incredibly smart. He had a nearly photographic memory, at least in relation to the specifics of his own creations. He retained and could easily recall specific data about any of his hundreds of experiments.
Jumba met Jacques von Hamsterville when the two were enrolled in college at Evil Genius University. They were paired up as lab partners, and the rest, as they say, is history. Even then, Jookiba was obsessed with creating new experimental species, and Hamsterville saw the potential of that work.
And after graduation, the two of them became business partners of sorts. They allegedly had a sort of a joke shop together, but then Jookiba was eventually hired to work at Galaxy Defense Industries as their lead scientist. But on the side, he and Hamsterville worked on illicit genetic experiments. Hamsterville funded those experiments using money that was gained through illicit means.
Yes, unsurprisingly, two individuals both bent on evil don't always make great colleagues. There was friction. Jookiba felt that while he did all the work, Hamsterville cheated and embarrassed him and stole his work. And at some point, things reached such a level of tension between the two that Hamsterville turned Jookiba into the Galactic Federation for creating illegal experiments, even though it was Hamsterville who was supplying the cash and resources for that work.
Yeah, it is still a little unclear to me how Hamsterville got out of any blame in that initial situation, but he did not seem to come under the same level of scrutiny at the time anyway. Jumba's process, though, for bringing his experiments to life is not entirely known, and that is a fact which is undoubtedly a good thing, because it would be really bad if the wrong person learned how to replicate his creation of life. But we do know that after he created a sort of chemical soup to create each entity, he would then charge those molecules to create stable experiments. But charging was not always successful, and in cases where charging wasn't properly completed, the experiment would become unstable and glitchy.
Because of leaked footage, we know that one of his experiments made its way to Earth and was captured on the Hawaiian island of Kauai. And while there are people who doubt the veracity of that footage, the evidence is compelling enough that we felt it was worth examination as part of intergalactic history.
The information gained through that footage indicated that the experiment in question had, through a random series of events, ended up living in the home of 2 sisters, Nani and Lilo Pelekai. And while they thought that this experiment was just an unusual dog initially, and they named it Stitch, it actually turned out that it was Jookiba's Experiment 626. And while 626 initially posed a very real danger to Earth life, he was eventually tamed and continued to live on Earth with his adoptive family.
Jookiba ended up also living on Earth and integrated with Lilo and Nani's household, along with a mediocre Galactic Federation agent of the Plorganarian species, Agent Wendell Pleakley. Jumba also had in his possession all of his previous experiments in dehydrated pod form. Those pods were accidentally scattered around the island of Kauai, which was a massive danger, as the Hawaiian Islands have ample water sources that could easily activate these pods.
So to be very, very clear, we've kind of hinted at it, but I want to make it crystal clear. These experiments were highly illegal. The Galactic Federation had outlawed them. And Jumba had already been found guilty and incarcerated for his work. That was a direct result of his betrayal by Hamsterville. But he had been granted a reprieve by the Galactic Federation if he would help hunt down 626 when the creature initially escaped. And that was how the self-proclaimed evil genius ended up on Earth in the first place. And while Jookiba created experiments that were bent on destruction, the doctor himself was actually quite friendly and pretty personable, so he was able to blend in with human society, concealing his alien looks and adopting the local customs.
There were ultimately 6 batches of experiments. One of the things to keep in mind as we go through this sampling of Jookiba's work is that many of his experiments were designed not to create mass-scale mayhem, but to cause irritating disruptions that would lead to a general unrest in whatever population the experiment was released in. As he worked in species creation, his experiments became progressively more dangerous.
So Series 0 was sort of Jumba's test batch, including many experiments that could almost be considered helpful. This series tested basic abilities that could be incorporated into the experiment's genetic code, so that they would basically be hyper-focused on specific tasks.
Experiment 000, Dr. Jookiba's first experiment, was a problem right out of the gate. While Jumba clearly had an incredible command of the scientific processes that he needed to use to create the life, he wasn't entirely ready to deal with his own work. This first experiment, which looked like a dark purple version of his later experiment 626, was created by Jumba to be a killer, and it quickly evidenced a power that the scientist could not control. As a result, 000 was suspended and hidden on an icy planet for safety.
Unfortunately, though, some years later, 000 escaped and then self-augmented by adding its own cybernetic enhancements, including cybernetic legs, arms, and an eye, among other features. And after significant conflict, and again a very real danger to Earth, he was captured and imprisoned. And while the standard procedure for experiments that were captured at this point was to rehabilitate them and find a proper place for them to have fulfilling lives that used their abilities for good, there was no way anybody could see redemption for Experiment 000, and he had to be permanently incarcerated.
A more benign experiment in Series 0 that shows the idea of specific tasking is Experiment 062. This was a unique experiment in that, for some reason, Jumba borrowed from Earth's French culture while designing it. Experiment 062 spoke French and was designed to prepare food. His tail was even spatula-shaped. He was also given speed powers so that he could make full meals in seemingly no time at all. The secondary use of that speed was the creation of cyclones in battle.
But there were issues with 062's design. For one, his natural proclivity as a chef was to create really unhealthy, sort of fatty and calorie-dense foods with low nutritional value. So while people who ate his food completely enjoyed it, they also tended to quickly put on weight and grow lethargic, which is bad enough in and of itself. But additionally, Experiment 062 tended to find those fattened up by his food delicious themselves, and he would eat them.
When 062 was captured and turned from evil to good while on Kauai, he had to also learn that healthier foods could also be delicious. He eventually landed in his exact perfect place as a chef running a healthy French fry stand. His nickname, as a consequence, was French Fry.
We're going to move on to talking about Series 1, and this group was a more intentional effort on Jumba's part to create civic disturbances rather than that initial test batch. So instead of just having abilities to do specific things, the Series 1 experiments were designed to create a bit more conflict.
Experiment 113 was a luck-affecting experiment, and the design of this creature was interesting in that the physical tilt of its horns indicated just how it would influence influence the luck of those around it. When the green and ivory creature's horns pointed down, bad luck was certain to manifest, but if its horns pointed up, good luck would spread nearby. This particular experiment didn't seem to have any intention to his powers. He didn't seem to want to create misfortune and wanted to connect with others in a positive way.
Of course, when Jookiba initiated this particular project, the intent was to create bad luck for most people, but presumably good luck for himself. And once Experiment 113 was activated on Earth and assigned to a proper place by Lilo, he actually worked at a mini golf course, helping players get holes in one. And the young Hawaiian girl nicknamed him Shu, and he became an extended part of the Ohana, the family that quickly grew on Kauai as more and more experiments activated through exposure to water.
Another Series 1 experiment was 177. This small yellow creature was designed to eat ubernium, one of the most economical galactic sources of fuel, and thus impact the fuel market, driving prices up. But in the language of Jumba's home planet, Queltaquan, the word ubernium already existed, and it meant hair. So the experiment didn't go quite as planned, and instead of eating fuel, she ate hair. So she ate Jumba's hair immediately after her creation, but it will come as no surprise that once she was reactivated in Hawaii, she ended up in a hair salon creating fabulous looks for clients.
Yeah, that one worked out great. Moving on to Series 2, you'll note that as Jookiba progressed in his work, his experiments naturally became more and more complex. So Series 2 was designed with more serious destabilization in mind, and it integrated more cutting-edge technology and science into the biology of the creature being created.
Experiment 221, Sparky, was activated by Lilo and Stitch in a bathtub and became the first that Lilo named, turned from evil to good, and gave a home and purpose to. He was designed to manipulate electric currents. 221 was yellow and looked sort of like a lean version of Stitch, but with long antennae and a body that could morph to appear to be almost a streak with an elongated tail. Lilo and Stitch eventually identified exactly the right place for Sparky, powering a lighthouse on Kauai.
Experiment 222, created right after Sparky, couldn't have been more different. This experiment was designed to spread disease. It was tiny and pale green with what appeared to be a slime coat, and it looked almost like an amoeba with a slightly more defined form, large black eyes, and semi-transparent antennae. And the effects of Experiment 222's contagion, though, were not life-threatening. They were just kind of gross. Victims, 222 was actually designed to seek out global leaders to infect, would then get purple pimples and have burping spells, and their feet would become really, really smelly, and their eyes would get puffy.
When his ability was reversed and he was turned to a benevolent way of thinking, it turned out he could actually cure illness. Because he was small like a microbe, he could travel through the bodies of other beings and combat what ailed them. He was nicknamed Poxy by Lilo.
And in Series 3, Jookiba's work took on a slightly more sinister focus. These were designed primarily to break down the minds of their targets. This move into psychological warfare also marked a move away from havoc and chaos on Jookiba's part into more focused destructive goals.
One of the more obvious ways to break someone's psyche down is to insult them, and Jumba Jookiba designed an experiment to do just that. Experiment 322 eventually was named Heckler, and he was relentless when it came to throwing shade. He would pick apart a target's appearance, their intellect, their personality, and erode their self-esteem.
And even Heckler, though, who was this little orange creature and kind of had the personality of a bad Catskills comedian, found a place after being activated on Earth and transitioned into the Hawaiian Ohana by Lilo. He ended up working actually at a dunk tank, throwing insults to people to get them to throw balls at a trigger target to dunk him.
A more frightening project in the Series 3 experiments was Experiment 355, who could swap the minds of individuals, including more than two people at a time. Obviously, this would be a terrifying experience. 355 was a powerful and dangerous weapon of psychological warfare. He did, thankfully, also have the power to reverse the swap. He once swapped Jookiba's mind with that of his wife, which eventually led to the couple's divorce.
Yeah, we don't know a whole lot about Dr. Jookiba's wife. That's something I would like to learn more about. But when he was activated on Earth, the green two-headed 355 was given the apt nickname Swapper. And after he caused a good bit of mayhem with his powers, as you can imagine, people's minds being swapped was very confusing, things did get eventually sorted out, though. It was also realized that his ability could be used in a controlled manner to offer insights to people about how others thought or felt.
Series 4 was the fourth series built on that warfare focus of Series 3. At this point, Jumba started designing experiments with military applications, but they often didn't work out as intended.
Experiment 449 was a dog-like experiment with one basic mission, and that was to stop packages from being delivered. Presumably this was kind of an idea of like military parcels or something would be stopped completely. And to achieve this goal, 449 would throw himself in front of delivery vehicles. And Jookiba had made him almost indestructible, so even if a vehicle did impact him, there was virtually no damage. Eventually, 449 came to be known as Belly Up, and he was actually put to work testing automotive brakes at an auto manufacturer.
So, Experiment 489 was a blue octopus-like creature designed by Jookiba to squeeze the life out of an enemy. As a reformed experiment on Earth, however, that skill was put to use in a hospital. Huggo, as he came to be named, taught lessons on performing the Heimlich maneuver to children.
I especially like that one for some reason. When it came to Series 5, it seems as though Jumba realized that he had to think bigger if he wanted to achieve the level of disruption that he apparently dreamed of since he was very tiny. So at this point, he started to create creatures that could serve as elemental manipulators.
Experiment 505 was multiple shades of green with small beady eyes, stout antennae, and crab-like claws at the end of its arms. As he traveled through urban areas, he would collect pollution and garbage, swelling as he took on the mass of all he collected. Then he would turn into a toxic muck, and he would use that to flood cities.
505 was eventually nicknamed Plute, and he was trained to make the most of those abilities. So he would still clean up pollution and absorb it, but instead of then unleashing it as a weapon on metro areas, he would dispose of it properly.
Experiment 523 could control water and water vapor in the air and freeze it, creating disruptive freezing weather, including blizzards. As you can imagine, such a creature activating in Hawaii had the potential to cause catastrophic conditions. 523 looked exactly like you might expect for an experiment with elemental control over icy conditions. He was blue with slightly jagged protrusions from his head like icicles, and his four limbs were slightly pointy without much detail.
The effort to defeat and capture 523 was massive, but Lilo and Stitch did manage to prevail eventually. They got a little help from some other experiments. And once he had been convinced to become good, 523 was given the nickname Slushy and made a nice and very appreciated life for himself, making shave ice at a popular snack stand.
Series 6... That really consisted of battlefield or doomsday experiments with galactic implications and world-ending properties. These experiments were often more complex than Jookiba's previous work.
Experiment 624 was an incredibly adorable female experiment. She looked a lot like a slightly leaner version of the more well-known Experiment 626 who would come after her. She was pink, and she had big, beautiful eyes and two long, elegant antennae with purple tips.
624's unique skill set was centered around her ability to sing, but much like a siren, her song was not merely lovely. She could turn good experiments bad simply by crooning to them. The effect worked in reverse. If she sang her unique song backwards, she could turn an evil experiment good.
And as Jookiba progressed in his experiments after creating 624, he built them so that Angel, which is what she got nicknamed, couldn't sing in a way that would work on them. There was no risk that she would accidentally shift their intent. So basically, if he made an evil experiment after her, he wanted it to stay evil. But as such, Stitch was completely immune to her singing, so she couldn't turn him evil any more than she could have turned him good had he been evil at the time. But she and Stitch were immediately drawn to one another when she was reactivated, so much so that it was determined that her true place was with him.
Experiment 625, which was nicknamed Reuben, had all of the powers and abilities of 626, but he was lazy and was way more focused on sandwiches than he was on any sort of destruction. So while 625 could destroy a planet, he really just wanted cold cuts. Reuben was yellow and looked sort of like a pudgy version of 626 with smaller ears and overhanging fangs. 625 was activated from his dehydrated state by Hamsterville and Gantu, a former agent of the Galactic Federation, aboard Hamsterville's ship. Reuben became something of a sidekick to Gantu, cracking wise as the shark-like enforcer carried out Hamsterville's orders.
And eventually, Lilo Pelikai and Experiment 626, or Stitch, were able to round up all of Jookiba's experiments that had been scattered around Hawaii with the help of Jumba and others. So we've talked about a handful, but there were 626 in total, and eventually some after that might make another good episode. But all of this work on their part led to the Galactic Council actually offering Dr. Jookiba the chance to once again resume his work in his old lab. And initially he took the offer, but things went a little bit sideways when he was forced to create another experiment by Jacques von Hamsterville, who at that point had escaped from prison.
The creature Jookiba created for Hamsterville was evil, but Jumba had placed a failsafe in the design. If the experiment heard a certain song, it would switch off. And once Hamsterville was captured by the Grand Council, Jookiba decided that instead of returning to his old lab, he'd go back to life in Hawaii, and he lived with the Pelikais from that point on.
Yeah, Jookiba is kind of an interesting story in that his sort of life parallels that of his experiments a lot. As they were turning to good, he, who, again, had a pretty good, easygoing personality aside from wanting to be ultimate evil, also pretty easily was transitioned into being a force for good instead of a bad guy.
Yeah. It's good to see those redemption stories.
It is, and very heartwarming in many ways. So don't be afraid should you encounter an odd little creature. Or if you see a pellet with a number on it, don't put it in water. That's what I can tell you.
Yeah. So I've got some mail.
You do? Fantastic.
From Asgard.
Oh, that's always exciting.
So, hello, Holly and Brian. Been really enjoying your histories lately. They make bleak days brighter and trips over the Rainbow Bridge on my way to work ever so enjoyable. The deep look into Beta Ray Bill was particularly well received here in Asgard. There's one particular legend that I've always been interested in and would love to hear your thoughts regarding it. For years I've heard tales of the Chosen One, a child that would bring balance to the Force. I heard whispers that such a child was born of the Force itself. Anakin Skywalker, after the purge that came to the Jedi following his transition to the dark side, I know many people no longer considered him to be the Chosen One, but I wonder why. Didn't he in fact bring balance to the Force? The Jedi's numbers had grown so large there were only 2 Sith, Master and Apprentice, in purging the light side. Wasn't there in fact now balance? 1 Master, 1 Apprentice for each side? I'd love to hear a more in-depth look into the legend of the Chosen One. Have others been considered to hold that title? Are the Jedi still waiting, or did they interpret something wrong? Do the Sith have a similar legend? Thank you for all that you do, Thor, Hagland, Odin's son.
We've talked about this before, not on this podcast.
No, we on our other podcast on Full of Sith.
We have, and one of the things that I always point out is that this idea of balance is not a math equation. So it's not a 1-to-1, but more like a sense of settling the Force.
Yeah, and there's been a lot of talk about how balance is sort of used in a much more ancient sense, where it's not a scale where you have evil on one side and good on the other, but it's more of a using good and not using that malice, and that's where you find balance. Say in your life, you wouldn't say, oh, I found balance in my life by balancing good and evil equally. You'd find balance by eliminating evil.
Right, to make a really pedestrian comparison, like I doubt anyone would say they had found balance by eating vegetables one day and nothing but fried fatty food the next. Right?
Yeah.
Like balance is more about kind of a more even-handed approach.
Yeah.
And making good choices as often as possible.
So, thank you for your letter, though, Thor, Odin's son. And we'd love to hear from Asgard more. And there's definitely opportunity to take a look for us to do an episode on The Chosen One at some point, and definitely more topics of Asgard. That's definitely something that's of interest to me. So thank you for your letter.
Yes, indeed.
So, Holly,
Yeah.
where can people find you?
Oh, I'm everywhere. You can find me at Surliest Girl on Twitter. I'm also on Instagram as SurlyGirly5. And you can find me across the spectrum of social media for my regular history podcast, Stuff You Missed in History Class, as Missed in History. That is also our website address, missedinhistory.com. I also do a podcast called Drawn, which is about animation, and that is at drawnpodcast.com. And then I'll let you talk about our Star Wars podcast that you just referenced.
Yeah, so you can check that out at fullofsith.com, and we do it every week talking about Star Wars, and that's that. You can also find me at Swankmotron on Twitter and all your favorite social media sites, or swankmotron.com, and then you can find links to all my writing all over the place from there. As far as Authentic History, if you would like to leave us a message, we'd love to get more mail from all corners of the galaxy and the 9 realms. That would be authentichistory.com, and you can leave a message for us there on our contact form, and we'd love to hear from you. If you want to check out any of our back episodes, that's also the place to do it. We're coming up on 50 shows, Holly.
We are?
Yeah. It's coming up fast.
How'd that happen?
We just keep doing this.
Oh, I see.
That's how that works. And if you'd like to give us a review wherever you listen to your podcast, we greatly appreciate that. So unless you can follow us on social media everywhere, all over the place too, at Fothentics on Twitter, and if you look up Fothentic History on Facebook, you can find us there as well. Is there anything else, Holly?
Not that I can think of. You're so very thorough.
All right. Well, then, until next time.